This tutorial is to show you how to use question banks in Canvas in order to create quizzes in your courses. I have in mind online classes, and so I'll refer to that throughout, but of course this would work for any courses in which you are using a Canvas shell for your class. There's of course other ways that you might create quizzes using question banks, not the only way, but I like using question banks because it allows me to organize questions in such a way that it's easy for me to reuse questions as I want students to review material from earlier quizzes, or if I want to create other quizzes in the class using similar sets of questions, or if I want to use questions in a future class. Having them built into a structure of question banks makes that efficient and easy. So I want to show you how you can do that, and then I'll walk you through the process of building a quiz using those question banks. So the first step is to find where your question banks are, and that's actually not all that intuitive in Canvas. I'm here in a course that we created in the Adams Center for online teaching. I'm going to use this as the example as I work through. But you'll need to find your quizzes page. If you click on the menu item over on the left hand of your screen, quizzes, it'll take you to a place that lists any quizzes that you have in the course. You can see you already have some built here as people work their way through this class. It's not intuitive, as I said, but if you click on the three dots over here all the way on the right, you're going to see two options. The first one is Manage Question Banks. If you click on Manage Question Banks, it takes you to a page that lists all of the question banks that you have in your course. You can tell we've already created several question banks for this class. If you've never used question banks before, this might be blank. If you already have some quizzes in your class, there may be a question bank called Unfiled Questions. That'll often move all of your questions into one unnamed or unfiled question bank in a course. So you may not have much here yet. That's fine. It's easy to create question banks. But let me first show you how, once you have a question bank, how you can add questions. That itself is pretty easy. So if you click on one here, I've got two module examples that I'll be using in this class drawn from my Bible 102 class. So it's a class that covers Acts to Revelation. Module 1 are some questions about Acts. Module 2 are some questions about some of the next things that we would look at in the course. And I'm going to be imagining as I work my way through that I want to create a Module 2 quiz that includes a section that reviews questions from Module 1. So that's the intended task that I'm working on here. But you can see if I open up a question bank, it lists all the questions that I have, and if I want to add another question, it's fairly easy to do so. A couple things I might note here. When you're adding a question, I think it's helpful to add a question title. So if I'm going to add a question that's based on, let's say, chapter 11 in Acts, I might just put something as simple as Acts 11. This is just a way for me to get quick information about the question so that I know if it's a question I want to include in a quiz at some point. Students will never see these titles, so it's really just for you to help reference your questions. So I might give a quick title like that. I don't worry about the point total because I'm going to select how much these are worth once I'm in the quiz itself. So you can set this if you want, but again, I actually use that elsewhere, so I don't mess with the point value. Then I choose whatever question I want. And so you can see the different types of questions: multiple choice, true, false, fill in the blank. This is not a tutorial on how to create different types of questions, so I'm not going to walk through each of these at this point. That's something that you can experiment with and probably learn about fairly quickly, but it's also something we'd be happy to help you with here in the Adams Center. Also, if you are going to use the new quizzes feature in Canvas, much of what I'm going to demonstrate in this tutorial is obsolete. There's new ways to do these things in new quizzes. And also, excitingly, there are some new types of questions. So what I'm going to show you really is meant for the standard quizzes feature in Canvas that we have available to us now. Once we have the new quizzes feature more widely available, we'll need to adjust how we do things. So you can choose different types of questions. I'm just choose a multiple choice question, and I could type in a question here. So I've got my question, and then I can add in the answers. Right, so the correct answer is that they are Christians. I can put my correct answer anywhere, right, and I can add or delete possible answers. So if I only want to have three choices, I could delete, right, this fourth one here, and I've only got three options. Or if I wanted to add another option, I can click this Add Another Option. Now I've got back to 4. Right? So right now, the default is that this top one will be the correct answer. I could click on any of these if I wanted to make it the correct answer. I typically just leave the top one the correct answer because I'm going to go back and make sure that I'm shuffling my answers anyway. And I'll show you how to do that when I create the quiz. If you're not going to shuffle your answers, however, when you make the quiz, then of course you want to move around and have your correct answer be in different places. So I'm going to choose just some random here. Distractors. and choose, obviously indicate which one is the correct answer. The other option I have here is I can provide feedback. So if I want students to get a certain message from me when they answer the question correctly, I can tap that in here. If I want students to get a certain information from me when they answer it incorrectly, I can put that here. A really useful tool if I'm going to be using quizzes to help students learn material rather than simply assess what they know is in this box I could indicate a part of the chapter or a page number or maybe a section that they could go to in their notes or in a lecture or something to find the answer. So I could say, sorry you missed this one. If you want to research more or go back and check, look here, right, for information about this question. So I could point them to where they need to go to study before they take the quiz an additional time. And then I also have an option just to provide general feedback, whether they get the answer right or wrong. So those are all options that I have. And then once I'm satisfied, I just click Update Question, right, and it's added. I'm not going to actually add it here. But you can see how I've added some titles to all of these indicating that the chapter of the textbook that it comes from or the chapter of Acts that it comes from, right, whether it's part of a worksheet I've given them or it's just information that's coming directly from the book of Acts. So that's how I've organized things in this particular module. If I want to add a new module, and that's pretty easy. Right? All I need to do is click on Add Question Bank. Or sorry, if I want to add a new question bank, that's pretty easy. All I need to do is click the Add Question Bank button, and I can create a new one. I'm going to create a review question bank. And this is going to be where I'm going to put questions from each of my modules that are important enough. I want students to see those questions multiple times. So what I'm imagining here is that as students progress their way through my course, as they take the quiz over each module, they're also going to have a set of review questions from previous modules. So I'm going to create a question bank where I can put those questions. What are the questions I want them to see multiple times as they move their way through the course? I'm going to put them here. So I've created a new question bank, and then I'm going to copy some questions over from existing modules. So if I'm imagining myself creating a quiz over module 2 and I want some review questions from module 1, I'm going to pick some things from module 1 that I think are really essential, and I'm going to add those to that review question bank so that they're right there ready for me to draw on when I create the quiz. So I'm just going to more or less randomly choose 4 or 5 questions here from the Acts module, and it's really easy to add them to my newly created review question bank. Okay, so if I click on Move or Copy Question to another bank, brings me to this box, and it asks me where do I want it to go. So I'm going to scroll down here, they're in alphabetical order, choose Review, and then I've got this option. I can choose to keep a copy in the current question bank, which is my Module 1 question bank, or I can unclick that and it'll move it out of Module 1 and move it into the review bank. I wanted to keep it in both places. I just want to copy it. I don't want to move it. And so I'm going to click that, and that'll keep a copy in the Module 1 question bank and then add that same question to the review module bank. Okay, so move, copy question, and once I've selected that once, then it's really easy because these choices are kept for me every time. I just click on the questions and add them. So I'm just kind of randomly scrolling through and picking some, but you'd want to pick out what are those questions that are so important. I want people to see them multiple times. Okay, so let's imagine I've got 4 or 5 questions in there. Okay. I've added those all. You can see they're staying here in this module at the same time they're being copied over to the other one. So if I click back to my question banks, it will have reordered things alphabetically for me. So I can find my review module. I've got 6 questions in there, right? And there they are. Okay, so now I've got my question bank structure set up. I've got both I've got questions from each module, right? And I've got my review question bank, and now I can go back and I can build a quiz for Module 2, which is what I'm going to show you how to do now. All right, once I've clicked on quizzes in my course, then I can see all the quizzes that I currently have already. I'm going to add a new quiz. So I'm going to click the plus quiz button, and this is going to be my Module 2 quiz. Okay, and I can add a quick description of what this quiz is going to be about here. Okay, now I've got a short description of the quiz that just alerts students to what material they'll need to know for this quiz and tells them they can take it multiple times and Canvas will automatically select the highest score. I'll show you how to set that up in the settings here in a little bit. I found that it's best to keep these descriptions fairly short and succinct, especially if I'm going to have students move through the quiz one question at a time. Again, I'll show you that setting here in just a minute. If I have it set up to where they see the whole quiz all at once on the same screen, then this description is going to appear at the very top. If I have it set up to where they have to click advance and they kind of move through the questions one at a time, this description will be at the top of the screen every time. And so if I've got a big long description, that could be kind of cumbersome. So I've found it's best to keep this as simple as possible, but as clear as possible for students. All right, I'm going to show you how to add questions, then we'll come back and work on the actual settings for this particular quiz. The way I like to set up quizzes is to use question groups. What that allows me to do is to provide some sections for my quizzes, and then within those sections, I can have a set of randomized questions, questions that appear in a random order, questions that draw maybe on a larger pool of questions. Excuse me. If I don't care about that, if I just want every student to see the exact same quiz with the exact same order of questions, then I can just begin to add questions. I can click on New Question here, and I can type them in. Right? That's if I'm not using question banks, then I might go about and do it that way. But in this case, I would just click on Find Questions. I could find them on my question banks and just add them and arrange them in whatever order I wanted. Again, I kind of like to randomize the order of the questions because then I think that encourages students to learn the material rather than just memorize the quiz if they're taking it more than once. So I like to randomize the question order, and I like to randomize the order of the answers that they get. And so one of the ways to make sure they get the questions in different order is to use question groups. So I'll show you how to do that. I'm going to set up 3 groups for this quiz. Okay, Module 2 has questions about 1 Thessalonians and about Philemon. So I'm going to set up a group for both of those, and then I'm going to set up a group for my review questions. So I might just call this 1 Thessalonians questions. All right, I'm going to choose to pick 5 questions worth 2 points. I want 5 questions in my 1 Thessalonians section. I'm going to create this group. It's giving me a little bit of an error message right now because I haven't added questions to it, but I'm going to go and do that later. Right now I'm just going to build out the whole structure. Then I want some Philemon questions, and I want to pick 5 of those, also worth 2 points each. So right now I've got a quiz that's worth 10 points, right? 20 points rather, 5 questions at 2 points each. So create that group. And then I want to create my review questions. So I'm just going to call this review section. Right, let's do 5 questions there as well, but let's only make those worth 1 point. That way these aren't weighted as heavily as the questions about the new material. So that's why I've got it set up. And that again, because I can choose the point value here, that's why it's not as important to me anyway to select a point value when I'm creating the question banks. I'm going to be able to actually determine that point value when I'm building the quiz. So now I've got 3 sections, and in each of those sections I've got 5 questions, sometimes worth 2 points, sometimes worth 1. One thing I can do if I want to maybe provide some helps for my students as they're navigating their way through is I can add some headers between some of these sections. The way to do this, it's not completely intuitive, but if I click on New Question, right, and maybe I want to call this the 1 Thessalonians header, just so I know what it is, then I can click Text, No Question, and I can type in something I want students to see in the midst of their quiz. So something like, the following questions are about 1 Thessalonians. Create that, up that question, and now I can drag that to wherever I want it to be. In this case, maybe I want it to be the first thing students see before, right, they actually get to that section of 1 Thessalonian questions. Then I can do the same thing for the others. I could add a Philemon header, right? The following questions are about Philemon, and drop that here in between these 2. And then maybe the most important one would be something about the following questions are review questions from Module 1, so students get the idea we're transitioning out of the new material into some material we've covered early in the course. So I can set those up fairly easily, and I'm going to go ahead and do that now, so I've got the quiz structured like I want before I start actually adding the questions. Okay, now you can see I've got the basic structure set up the way I want. I've got my groups, and I've got some headers in between each group so that students can navigate through the quiz, hopefully without confusion. Now I want to actually add the questions to each of these question groups. So if I click on the Find Questions button, it brings up a box in which it lists all of my question banks from all of my courses. So I've got quite a few of these, so I'll have to scroll through to find things. You, again, may not have as many, but it is alphabetized, so I can scroll down. And I know these are all from my Module 2 question bank. So here's my Module 2 question bank from my Rapid Online course. That's what I want to select. And then it brings up a list of all the questions in that question bank. Here's where it's important for me to have those titles, because I can really quickly see, okay, what are the questions about 1 Thessalonians? I can kind of click those one at a time. Now, if I happen to know that I want all the questions from that question bank, I can just click select all. Right? It automatically clicks on all of them at once. That's not what I want to do in this case, right? I want to actually select specific questions because I've got my quiz divided into these two different parts, 1 Thessalonians and Philemon. So let me select all my 1 Thessalonians questions that I have. Right? Pretty easy to do so because of the way they're labeled. Right? And then I know that chapter 20, for example, happens to be on 1 Thessalonians. So I'm going to select those. Then I click down here, which group do I want to add these to? I want to add these to my 1 Thessalonians questions. So I click that, right, add the questions, and you can see that it automatically populates that group with those questions. I still get this error message, and I will until I save the quiz. Then that'll go away. Now, it's saying that it's going to pick 5 questions. How many do I have in here total? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 questions. So what that means is that when a student takes this quiz, it's going to randomly select 5 questions out of this pool of 8 and then then present them in a random order. So they're not going to see all 8 of these questions. They'll see a randomly selected set of 5. If I wanted to make sure that students saw the same questions each time, then I would just need to make sure that there are 5 questions in this particular group, right? And then it would just randomize the order. It wouldn't necessarily, we wouldn't be drawing from a larger pool of questions. So, but if I kind of like the idea of having a larger pool of questions, so that students take it multiple times, they won't see the exact same questions. I can do that by just having more questions in each group than it is drawing on. Okay, so in that case, each time they take the quiz, the way I have it set up, they're not going to see the same exact set of 5 questions on 1 Thessalonians. They might see a new question that they haven't seen before when they take it the second or third time, for example. So I'm going to do that same thing here with Philemon. All right, go back, click Find Questions. Thankfully, it keeps everything in the same place based on what I just did, so I don't have to scroll through. I can just click on Module 2. All of the questions I've used already are grayed out, and so that's helpful. And then I just want to select the questions that I've got here on Philemon. So let me click my Philemon questions. I'm going to add these to my Philemon's questions group. And now I've got those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 questions on Philemon. So again, it's going to randomly select 5 of those 7 each time students take the quiz. And then lastly, I want to add my review questions. So I have to scroll down here alphabetically to get to R for review. Review online course, right? Rapid online course, that's what I want. Okay, so here's all my review questions. I have, I think, 6 in here, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Let's imagine I wanted to make sure that every time students take this quiz, they're going to see the same 5 review questions. It might seem in a different order, but they're going to see the same 5. In that case, I would just want to select 5 of these, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I've got 5 questions. I'm going to add that to the review section. Now there's 5 questions in here, so they'll see the same, students will see the same 5 questions every time they take it. They'll just be in a different order. Okay, so now I've got it set up, the questions I want. I've got all my questions moved into my groups. I've got my groups in the order I want. This is pretty much ready to go. Now I need to go back and set the details for the quiz before I save it and publish it to students. Here are the options that I have. Right, I can choose between different types of quizzes. A graded quiz, obviously, students are going to get a score on. That score is going to go into the grade book. If I just want it to be a practice quiz that students can take however many times they want, then I will check this, and that's not going to affect the grade book in any way to do that. So those are some options I have there. I'm going to choose graded quiz, and if I choose that it's a graded quiz, I have to choose which category in my course I want these points to go into. These are already categories that we've added in this class, so if you already have some assignment categories set up, you'll have the choices here. We've got one that's called quizzes, so I'm going to choose that these points are going to go into the quiz category in my grading scheme for my course. Then I've got some options here. As I said, I like to shuffle the answers. That means that A, B, C, and D in a multiple choice question, for example, are going to get mixed up and reordered each time students take the quiz. So if they're going to take it multiple times, which is how I'm going to set it up here in a minute, they're not going to see the answers in the same order. The reason I like to do that is I think that encourages students to learn the material rather than just memorize the quiz. I want them to know that the answer to the question is this, right, rather than the answer is A or something, right? And so that just helps them make sure they know the material rather than just memorizing the quiz. So I'm going to choose shuffle answers. When you do this, however, do make sure that if you have any questions that included an all of the above or none of the above option, that language has been changed to something like all of the available answers or none of the available answers. Okay. If you want to set a time limit, this is how you do it here. Well, I've got 15 questions, right? Maybe I want to set this for 20 minutes. If you're going to use a time limit, the reason I do often is because I'm not going to try to police whether or not students are taking their quizzes open book or open note. So for an online course, I often tell students that I understand and expect that this is an open book or open note quiz. They can use those materials. However, it is timed so that it's in their interest to know the information well enough that they don't have to look up every question. Then if they come across a question they don't know, they've got time, they can look that one up. But if they're trying to look up every question as they go through, they're going to run out of time and they're not going to be able to successfully finish the quiz. So one way for me to feel more comfortable with the quiz being open note, open book is to have a time limit. That does create a hurdle. It's not an impossible hurdle, but when I create a time limit, that does mean I'm going to have to find a way to make accommodations for any students who have an extended time allowance through Alpha Scholars. That's pretty easy to do, and I'll show you how to do that once I publish the quiz. But just be aware, if you choose to use a time limit on your quizzes, that is something you have to go back and account for. So I'm going to go ahead and choose a 20-minute time limit, and then I do like to set up my quizzes typically to allow students to take them multiple times. Once I've clicked that checkbox, then I can choose, do I want it to average their scores, pick their highest, or just pick their latest? I typically like students to have the option, or like Canvas to choose the highest of their scores. What that means is that if a student gets a 90% on their second to last attempt, they don't have to agonize over whether or not they want to take it a third time. They can take it that third time and not worry about ending up with a lower score than that 90% that they earned on their second attempt, for example. So that's what I like to do. You might want to weight it differently or maybe make more of a decision point for your students. In that case, you want to choose the latest or choose an average. But those are choices you've got. Then you can choose how many attempts. If I leave this unchecked, it just allows them to take it an infinite number of times. As soon as I check that, then I need to indicate how many times they're going to take it. As I've put in my assignment instructions, I'm going to allow them to take it 3 times, and it'll automatically choose the highest. Okay, this next box is all about the feedback that students are going to receive once they have finished the quiz. Okay, so this first one says that students are going to be able to see their quiz responses and that incorrect questions will be marked. In this case, we'll show what this looks like here in a bit. They'll be able to see exactly what they answered, see where they got points and where they didn't get points, and it'll flag for them where they missed a question. If I have this box checked, let students see the correct answers, it will show them on the missed question what they should have answered to get it right. So it'll show them their answer and it'll show them the correct answer. And I can put some limits on that. For example, since they're taking it 3 times, I could have it so they can only see the correct answer after they've taken their last attempt. Okay? Or I could have a certain time, right? The correct answers will be available at this time, this date, and then they'll be hidden after a certain time of day. So I've got some choices there. I typically don't let students see their answers because what I want is I want them to be able to see what they missed, but then have to go back to the book to study it. One nice way is I could say only after their last attempt, and so they can't see any right answers till they've taken it that 3rd time. Then, if they're continuing to miss one, they would be able to see what the right answer is there. In an online environment, I'm still hesitant to do that because it would allow a student to maybe share the correct answer with other students, right? Have it marked there. Obviously, they can still do that some if they've been able to successfully answer the questions on the quiz, but I tend to just, for myself, kind of leave that off. So after every attempt, what they're going to see is what they answered, and it'll flag any incorrect questions, but it won't tell them what the right answer is, what the correct answer is on those ones they've missed. Okay, this next box here is about how the quiz is going to be deployed for students. If I click on this box, then what's going to happen, it'll show them one question at a time. They'll answer that question and hit a next button to then jump to the next question. It'll open up a new screen with one question. So every screen will have one question on it as they navigate their way through the quiz. And then I can also lock it so that they can't go backwards. Once they've answered a question, the answer is locked. They can't go back and change the answer. So if I've got a quiz or an exam where I know that later questions are going to reveal information that will allow them to answer earlier questions, this is a way I can account for that. They have to move through the quiz linearly, and they cannot go back and change things after they've answered it. Students have different preferences. You might ask your students what they prefer. I think one of the advantages of having one question on the screen at a time, it is a little bit cleaner, a little bit neater. And so if students are easily distracted or easily intimidated by a long list of questions, this is one way to help them. And so I've heard from some students that like that. They like taking quizzes that are set up this way because it helps them stay focused. They're less likely to get distracted. There are other students who find it cumbersome to have to, click next every time, and they prefer to have all the questions on the screen at one time so they can kind of scroll and answer questions in whatever order they want and be more in control of their quiz experience. So I think there's advantages and disadvantages to both. You might just ask your students what they prefer. I'm going to leave that off, and so as you'll see here in a minute, the quiz is going to be set up so you'll see all the questions on the screen at the same time once you start the quiz. Okay, I can add a access code, a little password that students have to enter before they take the quiz. I use that in face-to-face classes so that students can't be in their dorm room taking the quiz, right, when students are in class taking the quiz. And I'll write the password on the board so that you have to be in class in order to take the quiz. In an online setting, I just don't find that necessary or helpful, so I typically don't use a password when I'm teaching courses online. You can filter an IP address. Again, if you were concerned that students be in a certain location, be on campus, for example, when they're taking the quiz, you could do that in an online setting. I just don't think that this is a particular tool that's helpful for us, and so I wouldn't worry about that at all. All right, last thing that you need to do is to set the deadline. You can, of course, add different deadlines for different students in your class. That's what you do here. Set a date that the quiz is due. That'll show up on the student's to-do list, right? This quiz is due at this time. And then you can set a time that the quiz is available from. So if you don't want students to be able to take the quiz until a certain point, then you'd set that available date, and they would not be able to start the quiz until, right, we get to this time that you set here. And then you can also make the quiz unavailable after a certain time. So sometimes maybe the due date and the available until date is the same. So once it's due, then they can't go back and open up the quiz and take it again. And so those are all options that you have that you can set up for the quiz. And I'm not going to worry about setting any of those for this particular quiz as an example. So now I've got all my settings like I want. I hit the Save Publish button, right, and I've got my quiz here. Now, as I've said, if you have a timed quiz like this one is, then you will need to go in and add extra time for students who have that accommodation through Alpha Scholars program. It's fairly easy to do, but you will have to do it for each quiz that you create. The way that you do it is that once you have published a quiz, you go over here to the right and click on Moderate this quiz. And that brings up a list that shows every student in your course, how many attempts they have left, how many attempts they've taken, how long they've taken on the quizzes, and what the score is. Of course, nobody has taken the quiz to this point. So let's say that Mary Jones, for example, has an accommodation that gives her extra time on her exams. And so I need to give her that extra time on this quiz. If I click the pencil icon here to edit things, I can add attempts if for some reason I want to give students extra attempts, or in this case, I can add time. On a 20-minute quiz, I'm going to give her an additional 20 minutes. So she'll have twice the amount of time because of her accommodation. And then I can click Save, and I've got the little note there. Unfortunately, I can't set these parameters for each student. So I can't go in and edit information about Mary Jones so that on every quiz she automatically gets double time. I have to go to each quiz and add the extra time for each student who needs it on each quiz. So that's a little bit more time consuming, but it's not too difficult. And so if it's a burden to you, then you can get around it by just not having a time limit on your quizzes. But if having that time limit is important, then this is a step that you'll need to take for each quiz you create if you have any students with accommodations in your course. Okay, so but again, it's not hard, just a little bit tedious to go through every quiz and do that. So I've got that set up. Now I'm going to show you what this looks like if you're a student taking the quiz. And this is something you can do. You can check any of your quizzes and see what the student experience is like by going down and clicking Preview. All right, so if I click on Preview, it shows me what students are going to see. So you can see I've got my quiz instructions here at the top, and it lists all the different questions here. Right, for those that are my header questions, it just says spacer, and all these question marks mean that that's a question that has not been answered yet. As soon as I answer a question, then it shows up as a check mark. If there's a question I know that I'm not sure about, I can flag it, and then that'll show up here as a flag, and I can come back and click on this question, right, and work on it again. So those are all tools to help students as they work their way navigating through the quiz. So I'm going to go through and answer the questions here, submit it, and then we'll be able to see what it looks like when students are taking their quiz. Oh, one more thing. I guess I should highlight this. You can see here, right, it's got a timer counting down from 20 minutes because the 20 minutes is the limit that I set for this quiz. So let me answer the questions. We'll hit submit and see what it looks like after students have finished a quiz. Okay, I've gone through and answered each question. I'm getting ready to hit submit. One thing you might notice, again, as you're going through the quiz, you can see I got the headers here that are alerting students to what's coming next, and then each question is numbered. Notice the titles that I have given to these questions do not show up here. Again, so those are not something students see. They're just numbering from the students. So I've got my Thessalonian section, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 questions. Then my Philemon section, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 more questions. Then my review questions, right? I've got those headers there to help alert students to what's coming up. So I've answered all of them, right? And if I'm a student, I can confirm that up here at the top by just scrolling through and notice I've got check marks on everything, right? And then I can scroll down to the bottom and hit submit once I'm all done, right? So the quiz is saved. Hit submit, so I had to hit it twice there to go to this screen, and then once I'm at this screen, it's going to show me how I did. So if I scroll down, right, it's going to give me the information I need. It tells me I got a 22 out of 25. All right, not bad. I take it again if I want to try to raise that, right? And then you can see here it flags any questions that I've missed with a red flag. It's not going to flag with a green flag, for example, the ones I've got correct. It just tells me I got 2 out of 2 points, and it tells me what I answered. On the ones I missed, it tells me I got 0 out of 2 points. It flags them with this red flag, shows me what I answered, but does not tell me which of the other 3 responses is the correct one. So then I would know, all right, I need to go back and look up again in the textbook or look up again in Thessalonians to see if I can find the answer to that question. And so that's the kind of feedback that I'm going to get, and I can scroll through and just see, right, which ones I missed, and it's easy to quickly scroll down and just notice, right, where the flags are and attend to those questions before I take it again. And so that's the kind of feedback that students are going to get when they take a quiz that has been structured in this way. So I hope that helps you see how you can use question banks to organize your questions so that you can efficiently use them when you're building quizzes. This also, of course, is a way that you can build quizzes where questions appear in sections grouped together, but in randomized order within those sections. And I think that offers a good way to create quizzes that help students learn material by taking them multiple times, rather than simply creating quizzes that assess recall. This is not the only way, as I've said, to create quizzes, but this is one way you can think about in your courses as you teach online or in face-to-face classes.